A step 4 inventory of our feelings. Once we have made the decision to give our will and our lives over to the care of a power greater than ourselves in step 3, it will have little permanent effect unless at once followed by this strenuous effort, which is step 4. We're trying to find a way to live where we can not only be sober, but can have peace of mind, serenity, and happiness by tackling our resentments. This is the beginning of putting our spiritual practice into action. Step 4 made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So knowing this is the first action required in our sobriety journey, why do so many of us procrastinate? For 2 reasons: fear and confusion. Some old-timers enjoy scaring newcomers to death by telling them how tough it is. Wait till you get to step 4. Blah! Secondly, many members of AA don't know the proper way to practice this step as outlined in the Big Book. Many of us were told to write down all of the bad things we'd done in our lives over countless pages, recounting memories and traumatic experiences, only to find that we already knew all of those things about ourselves and that the majority of the things we listed didn't have anything to do with our alcoholism. This is what step 4 really asks us to do. Make a searching. Searching and fact-finding mean the same thing. Make a fearless. To face facts is to fearlessly look at them. Make a searching and fearless moral. This is where a lot of people get confused and think it means making a list of all the dirty, filthy, and nasty items in our past. If Bill Wilson wanted us to make a list of dirty, filthy, nasty things in the step 4 would read, made a searching and fearless amoral inventory. Moral, truth, seeing things as they really are, the right and the wrong of any given situation. Truth and moral mean the same thing. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So what the Big Book really asks us to do is list our resentments, but we're to look inside our minds and find our flawed thinking processes. A power greater than ourselves cannot help guide us until those flawed thinking processes leave our mind. Our inventory is valuable because we're starting on a life-changing process to develop the healthiest possible relationship with ourselves and with others, so we can develop peace and serenity in our future lives. In order to get started, we need to learn how to get comfortable with discomfort. Mindfulness is not about clearing your thoughts, but simply noticing what's going on in a non-judgmental way. Identifying our own behaviors and habits is one of the most difficult things to do because our behaviors are so familiar to us that they seem normal. For example, perfectionists might notice, quote, "Wow, I am so judgmental and controlling all of the time. I really should stop doing that and start being nicer," unquote. But they haven't yet noticed how harsh they are being with themselves during this interaction. So instead, they judge themselves further for being too judgmental, which only lowers their self-worth and makes them feel even more judgmental. Another example, codependents might enthusiastically jump into forgiveness, only to become angry with themselves for failing to forgive someone who treated them like garbage. Put another way, they're willing to forgive others, but they're not able to forgive themselves for their own feelings. Mindfulness helps us to become aware of our own thinking patterns, so we can start to realize how we think. The goal is not to try to stop thoughts or feelings that we don't like, but instead to allow them to be there without judging, changing, or avoiding them. This lets us build a friendly, curious relationship with the stuff going on inside our body and mind, even the stuff that feels awful. The first key to overcoming resentment is allowing it to be there. To begin our inventory, we're going to need a pen and paper. Next, make a series of 6 columns. The heading above the first column is, "Who am I resentful towards?" The second column is, "What did they do?" We then list our resentments in each column. When we have finished, we will have learned 2 things about ourselves which we may not have acknowledged. In column 1, we learn how resentful we really are. In column 2, we learn that it is not others we resent. It's what they've done to us that we actually resent. 2 very valuable insights. Before we go to column 3, Bill Wilson told us something very important in the chapter on step 4 in the 12 and 12. He wrote about the 3 basic human instincts that we all possess. The 3 basic human instincts for survival. Quote, "Creation gave us instincts for a purpose. Without them, we wouldn't be complete human beings. If men and women didn't exert themselves to be secure in their persons, made no effort to harvest food or construct shelter, there would be no survival. If they didn't reproduce, the earth wouldn't be populated. If there were no social instinct, if people cared nothing for the society of one another, there would be no society. So these desires for the sex relation, for material and emotional security, and for companionship are perfectly necessary and right, surely God-given. Yet these instincts, so necessary for our existence, often far exceed their proper functions. Powerfully, blindly, many times subtly, they drive us, dominate us, and insist on ruling our lives. Our desires for sex, for material and emotional security, and for an important place in society often tyrannize us. When thus out of joint, self-will run riot, people's natural desires cause them great trouble, practically all the trouble there is. No human being, however good, is exempt from these troubles. Nearly every serious emotional problem can be seen as a case of misdirected instinct. When that happens, our great natural assets, the 3 basic instincts, have turned into physical and mental liabilities." Unquote. These are the basic instincts of life which create self. If we want a power greater than ourselves to direct our thinking, we have to do something about these resentments. The guidelines in the Big Book will show us how to look at these things truthfully, how to remove them, and how to keep them from coming back. Resentment is the number 1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. For we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. Resentment means to refeel. When somebody does something that we don't like, that's not a resentment. It doesn't become a resentment until we replay it in our mind and feel pain a second time. The first time somebody did it to hurt us, but when we go over and replay it and feel the pain for the second time, we're doing it to ourselves. And we do it over and over and over and over. Each time we play it in our heads, after a while, it turns around and comes back at us. When it comes back at us, it comes back as self-resentment. Self-resentment turns to self-pity. The sickest that a human being can be is to have a mind filled with self-pity. 4 primary emotions. Primary emotions heads column 3. This is where we list an emotion triggered by our resentments. Though each of us can probably list dozens of emotions, we will use 4 primary emotions: fear, hurt, sadness, and love. Emotions such as anger, anxiety, revenge, etc. are secondary emotions that keep us from feeling the primary ones. For example, I am afraid versus I have anxiety. I'm sad versus I am angry. I'm hurt versus I want revenge. Using primary emotions puts our focus not on what others did, but on how we feel when experiencing what happened to us. We're going to have a profound alteration in our reaction to life. Big Book, page 64, quote, "In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore, we were burned up. On our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sexual relations which had been interfered with?" Using Bill's guidance on the 3 basic instincts of life, we set to fill out the 4th column under the heading, "What basic instinct was threatened by the actions others did which upset us? Was it our desire for sex, emotional and financial security, or to feel valued in the community? Write down which one." Column 5 identifies what part of ourselves was affected. Threaten our social instinct in any way our self-esteem is affected and upset us. Threaten our security, either material or emotional. Our self-esteem and personal relations are affected and upset us. Threaten our sex relations. Our self-esteem, personal relations, and pride are affected and upset us. We begin to see what part of self does stand out. We begin to see a pattern. We can't do anything about a problem until we understand the problem. We might have always thought it was a bunch of feelings flitting through our minds that we couldn't do anything about. Now we realize that our feelings come from a threat to one of the 3 basic instincts of life. When we understand how threats to our basic instincts drive our emotional reactions, we will comprehend that how we interpret those feelings directly triggers our thoughts and actions. In column 4, we learn it's not even what they've done to us. It's how we've chosen to react based upon one or more of our basic instincts being threatened. In column 5, we learn what part of how we think about ourselves has been affected. Is it our pride, self-esteem, self-worth, sense of security, personal relations, etc.? In column 6, we write down some of the behaviors that we have chosen in the past when facing these resentments. We do this without judgment. Afterwards, we will list some other possible actions that might be useful in the future. If we're going to obsess and beat ourselves up like always, we will need to add some healthier alternatives to our repertoire. Our old, unhealthy thinking and behaviors will still wish to exert their power over us due to our familiarity with them. When they arise, we can simply acknowledge their existence, but choose not to act on it. Remember, for better or worse, these old ways of thinking have helped us to survive when they were the only choices that we knew. Be gentle and loving towards them for bringing you this far. Our expectations are premeditated resentments. It is our unfulfilled expectations that are the source of our troubles. We all wish to be loved and celebrated for who we are. So when events don't reinforce this perception we have of ourselves, it's painful. How many of the measurements that we use to justify our own opinions and behaviors are based on false beliefs we have about ourselves? Insane thinking. Once you've acknowledged and allowed this resentment to be there, the next step is realizing that you might be happier without it. This is not asking you to pretend that the abuse wasn't real or that it wasn't quote-unquote that bad. It's simply an understanding that your heart might feel more free without resentment. Beneath resentment are the real issues: shame, worthlessness, inadequacy, and sadness. When we let down our walls, we're able to work with these softer emotions and realize that our knowledge and intuition still remain fully intact. We do not need to worry about suddenly becoming a doormat again or bringing another toxic individual into our lives. In fact, as we explore these underlying wounds, we're likely to start offering something new to ourselves: unconditional love. We can use our resentment and rumination to develop the skill of unconditional love toward ourselves. The challenge with fear-based thinking is that our minds go into this super rigid analytical thinking mode, which causes the same thinking, sort of like an infinite loop that leads to negative thoughts. And then we get frustrated or afraid when they don't stop, which just leads to more nasty thoughts. Being gentle, kind, patient, and compassionate with the weird thoughts, like one would with a sick friend, starts to relax everything. This is how having a trusted sponsor to share these struggles with is vital. It breaks the feedback loop. And if you try being nice to yourself and you're met with a voice that says, quote, "This is stupid. You're just doing this to avoid the actual truth that you're bad," unquote, then you can welcome that voice too. The more comfortable you become with discomfort, the more the discomfort will reveal itself to you. Remember, we're doing a non-judgmental inventory, and these thoughts are part of our stock and trade. A lot of times, there's some part of us that feels defective or crazy or evil, so we hide this from family, friends, and even therapists, because if other people think we're good, then we believe that we're good. With mindfulness, it's important that we're 100% honest with ourselves about the strange thoughts and behaviors that we push away. Everything is welcome. You do not have to pretend to feel good or normal when there is a voice nagging you that you're not. In fact, that's the voice you need to be in touch with. Remember, your higher power loves you unconditionally. The things that you discover while doing this work are what causes one to look for love through external sources of validation. Various people or experiences might trigger this feeling of inner defectiveness, so you try to seem normal and unaffected by it, because you want to be normal. But that's exactly the feeling we want to explore. This work is not about keeping up appearances or securing external validation. It's about not stifling or distracting from the scary inner voice, but rather welcoming it so that we can finally explore and disarm it. As we start to understand our own behaviors, there are going to be really difficult, painful feelings that surface. These feelings will take over and convince you that they are the truth. Mindfulness will allow you to acknowledge that they are real, but not necessarily true, so you can continue walking through this pain without being consumed by it. You are essentially developing a friendly, curious relationship with your own feelings, especially the bad ones. For example, some folks see mindfulness and meditation as, quote, "I'm thinking of kittens and rainbows, healing and processing my past, loving my inner child. It's all so beautiful. I'm crying," unquote. But then this horrible feeling starts creeping in and the sufferer thinks, quote, "What the heck? I was doing mindfulness. Why am I feeling worse?" unquote. Because what's inside is not kittens and rainbows. It is an unbearable sensation that we have subconsciously been avoiding since the moment that it entered our bodies. Doing inventories helps to facilitate the process of feeling these emotions as related to our resentments. Language helps us to identify the feelings that come up in mindfulness. If you're suffering from trauma, there's a good chance that you don't even feel your true emotions because you're being blocked from experiencing them. By learning about these emotions and preparing ourselves to feel them, they won't be nearly as scary. Slowly, we make the transformation from, quote, "my body feels numb or weird," unquote, towards using language to identify the actual feelings. With mindfulness, we want to shift away from the story that plays out in our minds and start focusing on the sensations in our body. We cannot begin to think about these feelings until we understand how they affect our bodies on a cellular level. In doing this work, we are not in any way pretending that the trauma we endured wasn't real or that we are lessening its impact. We are simply trying to explore why the mind latched onto certain thoughts and behaviors in response to it, and what it is trying to protect us from. Some of these things may need the help of professionals to address, and for goodness sake, don't ever do this work without the help of a knowledgeable sponsor or any other outside help which you may need to be safe. The whole point of working the AA program is to stop drinking. Inventories are tools to help us to understand how our emotions influence our obsession of mind. They also help imbue in us the fact that we will not be able to stay sober without the reliance on a power greater than ourselves that loves us unconditionally. This does not happen overnight, but with time, this spiritual practice of using the 12 steps becomes more and more automatic until it becomes our new default. Always, our goal is to stay sober one day at a time. Many resentments stem from betrayal and abuse. The 4th step inventory is our first attempt in addressing the idea that we can release these things from our own hearts so that we can be free. Betrayal convinces us that we are being let down and that our needs won't be met. This isn't about rewriting history, but rather finding joy and meaning in the process of opening our own hearts. The biggest problem with resentment is that it keeps us locked into our usual patterns and keeps us away from the wound. This is not a conscious distraction. The manic, obsessive energy of resentment keeps us in a quote-unquote high state, which makes it very difficult to feel our own pain. Instead, our pain just becomes a vague numbness. It's not that the other person didn't do anything wrong. It's the hating and focusing on them that blocks one from the mindset and tools needed to find love for yourself. As long as we believe, quote, something bad happened to me, unquote, we are distracted from the energy that fills us with love. Resentment is the natural reaction to betrayal and pain, so please don't judge yourself for carrying it. The key is discovering what's behind the resentment. We don't resent people unless there was a great deal of pain involved. If a random stranger insults us on the sidewalk, we don't spend months or years ruminating about it. We only do that when we feel hurt or betrayed by someone we love, trust, and care for. But here's the kicker. You cannot release resentment with your mind. You cannot think your way out of this problem. Instead, you need to gain the tool that you don't have, soothing love. Every single feeling that is revealed to us during an inventory needs to be welcomed without judgment. Telling oneself not to feel these things will make them feel worse. What usually happens with a wound is that it's given to you. Your body accidentally believes its message. You hate the person who inflicted it, and you spend the rest of your life proving you're not what they say you are. Basically, you become the opposite of your wound. For example, perfectionists secretly believe that they are worthless and deeply flawed. Codependents secretly believe that they are worthless and never enough.